Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Nir Haloani, the CTO of COTI, and I would like to thank you for joining us for our second live webinar on COTI TestNet and the Trustchain protocol, in which I will overview some of the key innovations and components presented in COTI TestNet and explain how we address some of the industry shortcomings such as privacy, trust, stability, scalability, and transaction costs. Through the webinar, I would like to review the main components of the COTI ecosystem, such as full node, Trustcore node, DSP nodes, and history nodes, and also drill down to the flow and architecture of the system. Later on in the session, you will be able to ask questions, and I will also overview some of the upcoming developments which will be available in the next versions of the mainnet, such as multi-DAG, smart contract, and stablecoin framework. So first, let's drill down to the tech overview of our platform. So first, what exactly is COTI offering which is different and unique? COTI is the first enterprise-grade digital payment platform which eliminates all intermediates, enabling private payment solution and white label solution built atop our platform, and also empowering currency digitalization and deployment of advanced fintech product. For example, we can support payment network, stablecoin, loyalty program, and every white label PSP solution which is required. So what exactly are the industry shortcomings, as I said before, that COTI Trustchain infrastructure addresses? In most blockchain platforms, there are numerous challenges which deter the adoption of cryptocurrency to the mainstream use. As I said before, some of them are privacy, trust, stability, scalability, and high transaction cost, which all of these problems exist in most of the existing blockchain platforms, such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and others. COTI infrastructure addresses these issues by providing a DAG-based Trustchain protocol, which provides high scalability together with trust, privacy layer, and also stability framework, which is embedded in the infrastructure itself. To better understand the COTI ecosystem and architecture, I will overview briefly some of the Trustchain components and the rules in the system. In COTI network, there are 4 types of nodes. The first type of node is the full node, which is the gateway to every transaction and any client interaction in the system. The full node is responsible for attaching transactions to the DAG, validating the transaction itself, propagating them to the network, and also executing the proof of trust and collecting the network fees, which is then propagated to the financial node, which I will overview later on. The second type of nodes, which are currently more highly trusted nodes, are DSP nodes, which are nodes responsible for reaching consensus on the account balance and data integrity. Another important node in the COTI network is the Trustcore node, which adds the layer of trust to the network. This type of nodes are dedicated nodes which are responsible for calculating participant trust score and basically defining how much consensus and how much power the network will need in order to confirm each transaction. And the last type of nodes are the history nodes, which are responsible for storing all the transaction history of the COTI ledger. This type of nodes are very important because we don't want to store all the history of transactions in all full nodes. Another 2 types of servers in the COTI systems are the KYC server, which is responsible for onboarding the KYC verification process, and also the zero spend server, which allows us to release idle transaction within the network. Now, it is important to note here that these type of servers are cold servers because currently we are the only one who run them and operate them, but in the future they will be operated by a decentralized government. So it will start as a centralized endpoints and will move to a decentralized government controlling decentralized entities, which will allow us to be fully decentralized. So if we put all of this architecture and component together and try to illustrate it in a flow and architecture system, looks similar to what you see right now. The interaction starts with an onboarding process followed by an initial trust score being generated and then enabling a user to generate his seed, connect to the COTI wallet, and start to transact. All transactions are monitored by the DSP nodes and trust score nodes, and each transaction is propagated in clusters and within its domain. I will later on describe it more in details. To better understand the flow of how a transaction lives in the COTI network and how is the flow moves in the COTI network, we prepared a short video which explains it.
Transactions sent from the COTI wallet need a trust score and send a request to the trust score node. Once the wallet has a trust score, it adds it to the transaction, and the transaction moves on to the full node. The full node verifies the transaction and selects sources to validate. It then performs proof of trust, optimizing the DAG structure and preventing spam. The transaction is added to the DAG network. Next, the full node sends the transaction to two double spend prevention nodes to prevent fraud. Once the transaction receives a green light from the two DSP nodes, it's sent to the entire DSP network, trust score network, and zero spend server. A majority of DSPs determine the transaction is valid, and it's sent to the entire network. The transaction is validated. After a number of validations, the transaction's trust chain reaches the threshold. Once the threshold is reached, it is known as Trustchain consensus. A transaction that has both TSPC and TCC is considered confirmed.
Okay, so what I would like to say is, in TestNet, other than the other innovation that we had, we built basically a full ecosystem. A full ecosystem for us means something very different from what you know and what exists in other platforms. And as we see it, most blockchain platforms don't provide the infrastructure and tools requires for everyday transactional uses. Meaning it allows you to deploy a token, for example, but other than transferring it to the person that you wish to transfer it to, users don't really have access to it. If you wish to have access to a token, then okay, you do ERC20, you deploy it, you transfer it to your friend or whoever you transact with, but it doesn't really have an access to it. In order for real fiat money to enter the system, it will require the user to buy it from an exchange, a third-party exchange. It will require the listing issuer to list this token in exchange. It will cost a lot of money. It will take a lot of effort, which in COTI, it's actually built in and not really required. I mean, if we want to be a very straightforward solution, we build our own exchange, which is the gateway for deploying tokens on our network. It won't enroll any fees which are part of the listing, meaning from day one, you can enter fiat and add pairs of fiat and crypto and start to transact for real in the real world using your new token. By that, we also provide frameworks which will define what pairs you would like to have, if you would like to have stability or collateralization on it, and many other stuff which are very, very, wizard-based, very easily customized, doesn't require any programming language or any programming at all. It's all a plug and play, and you have your own token, your own definition of the token. It's available through fiat and through credit card, and you can start to transact it for real. And this is a very, very important aspect because it turns out our system to a real full ecosystem and not just infrastructure without any application or services that you can use. Another important aspects of our protocol and infrastructure is, of course, the trust core and the Trustchain protocol. In the AlphaNet, we already have the initial trust core, which was part of the platform. In the TestNet, we also introduced and implemented the update of trust core. Now, the problem of trust core and why it is required is because many businesses define trust between users and define a high-risk entity based on things which are not related to the business, meaning based on the industry itself and not how risky this operator is within the network. So in our case, the real definition of trust defines and based on how you interact in the system. It's not based on how, what is your history of transaction in other businesses or what your history of bank transaction. It only defines on how you transact within the system, on your behavior within the system. If you are trustworthy in the system, your trust will rise. So all of this is embedded as part of our DAG-based attachment algorithm. It will define how much work a transaction requires. It will also define other aspects within the system, which I will describe later on. But it is important to say that we apply trust not only to consumer, not only to merchant, but also to node operator, meaning every entity in the system has trust associated with it, and the trust associated with it is different. Meaning for consumer, it represents the buying power of users, as well as the time it is going to take to approve their transaction. So highly trusted users within the system will have their transaction and settlement being immediate, and other will require more time because we can't trust them yet. For merchant, the trust score is actually like a ranking-based algorithm. It will show the consumer how trusted or what is the ranking of the merchant, which is something, for example, missing in PayPal. You transact with a merchant which PayPal process and transact with, but they do not provide you how trustworthy or what is the ranking of this type of processor or merchant. It will also define the fees that this merchant will be required to pay per transaction, and it will also define the rolling reserve used for dispute resolution within the system. Meaning, if you are more trusted, the rolling reserve will be minimal, and you are new to the system, we will require more rolling reserve to operate your dispute. And the last type of trust score which we apply is to the node operator. Node operator trust represent actually the reputation of this node in the network. Once you connect to the wallet, you will be able to select the node that you wish to connect to. You will see his fees, and you will also see the trust score of this node. The trust score is, again, a ranking mechanism and a reputation mechanism, which will allow the consumer to choose the best trustworthy node to operate with and to transact with. Another very important innovations that we have developed, and it's very unique, is a OneClick payment request. Now, most blockchain platforms don't have the infrastructure tools required for embedding and integrating a PayPal-like payment button, meaning you are very custom in the real world to use PayPal, to take the button of PayPal and the code of PayPal, just embed it in the website. This is a 2 minutes integration, and by that you have PayPal integration and PayPal processing of any payment in the system. So in our case, it's going to be the same. I mean, embedding the one-click payment request of COTI is going to be as easy as embedding PayPal-like button in your website. So you're going to have a flow which is very similar to what you know, and we are going to present it in a second. And this flow is going to be not just easy, it's going to be what you are familiar with, and it's not going to change the user experience once you try to transact in the COTI network. I'm going to show you a video of how it's going to work. As you can see, the flow is very, very similar to any payment type of processing that you will use, very similar to PayPal. It doesn't require sophisticated communication other than providing your seed, which is different than providing a user and password, but it's as simple as that. Another important aspect which we have developed is the COTI proof of trust consensus. And the problem with most blockchain is that they cannot achieve high scalability and they cannot really handle transaction in parallel. So in COTI, we have developed a new proof of trust consensus, which is defined by the trust score, as I said before, and a normalization, also the amount of transaction, how much you're going to pay, and other factors which will define how much work the network requires for this type of transaction. This is like mining, but it's not really mining because it's very minimal. It's going to enforce more work on low trusted user, but it's going to require less work from high trusted user. So as you frequently use the system and use COTI as your payment method, you become more and more trusted, and the time it will take to reach consensus is going to be very, very minimal. That's how we can support high throughput. Okay, another aspect that we added is a node manager. Node manager is just for the purpose of adding more and more full nodes to the system, more and more BSP nodes to the system. And the way that it works is that it's an automated way for discovering neighbor nodes and avoiding the potential risk associated with accepting data from a third party that you don't know. So COTI Node Manager is actually just the gateway. It's not going to enforce anything that it's not auditable. It's going to be very, very transparent, and I'm going to show you how. The node operator itself runs all type of nodes, meaning all the network nodes are going to be listed in this node. It's going to be visible through an explorer that I'm going to show you. And by that, the topology of the network is going to be discovered by other nodes. If you are not a verified full node operator, if you didn't get the certification from the central processing server, you are not going to be able to execute a full node in our system. Meaning that in order for you to be able to execute and to be a node operator in the system, you will need to register first as a regular user, then upgrade your type of operations and type of wallet to a node operator wallet, and by that get a certificate which is then assigned to the full node itself and validated to the node manager. Once the node manager approved you, you can start transacting in the system. So if we look at how it's going to be auditable and transparent to the user, I'm going to show you a map of. This is the map of the node operation currently running. Currently, we are the only one who run the nodes in the system. So it's all COTI. You can see not just the type of nodes, but also their fees, their trust. And you will be able to see once you upload your full nodes to the system, it will appear on the map. If it's not going to be like that, you're going to be aware of it, and you're going to see it in real time. Another very important aspect, at least for a payment platform and any fintech product, is the problem of privacy. If you think about it, if we transact on Bitcoin, on Ethereum, and many other platforms, we are not the only one, solving this problem, but it's a very, very big problem. And when you transact in Bitcoin, in Ethereum, once I know that you are the merchant and I know your address, I know all the history of transacting users on this address, meaning I see exactly your turnovers, I see exactly who you transact with, what did they buy, how much they paid you. So basically a merchant by that is exposing all his business intelligence to everyone. And this is the case, in most blockchain. So in COTI, we actually provided a 3-layer solution for privacy, which resolve this issue and allow a one-way hash function and a one-time address, which allows you to generate many addresses for different purposes. One address which is generated for each transaction, for example, and totally anonymous transactions in the system. So if I drill down to what are the use cases here, so for the user, you can define the type of transaction based on the address you want to associate with. Let's say, for my personal commodities, I'm going to use one address. For my work, I'm going to use one address, and stuff like that. And it doesn't have to be, connected. It's connected by the seed itself, but for the users who see it, the address is different, and the transactions on this address are different. For merchant, as I said, you can define that you will want, each transacting operation is going to produce a different address, and for each transaction, you're going to have a different address, which is not trackable and cannot be defined what amount of transaction you had and what type of transaction you had other than this one-time transaction. And as I said, you're going to also have a peer-to-peer privacy, which are one-time addresses which prevent all possibility of tracking previous party interaction. They are totally anonymous and can use just for user peer-to-peer transactions. Another very important aspect that we talked about in the AlphaNet, and it is now finalized in the mainnet and is also in the testnet, is the arbitration process, which is now available. Currently, we are not yet accepting third-party arbitrators or users in the network to be arbitrators because we still don't have merchants on board to the system. We do have several, but they are running in a beta phase, and we are not going to add arbitrators in the beta phase. But the problem here is very, very obvious. In most blockchain, once you transact, you can't reverse the transaction. You can't dispute on it. If we want to be a real PayPal-like solution, you need a way to dispute. Even on blockchain, you need a way to dispute and reverse transaction in case you didn't get the product and get some protection in order for user to use it as a mean of payment. So what we defined is a 2-layer arbitration. The first one is very, very similar again to the mainstream, let's say, platforms. It's going to have an interaction between the user and the merchant in which they have a time frame that they need to get settled. If in that time frame they didn't get the dispute resolved, it will move to a very unique arbitration process done by a decentralized government. It's a collective decentralized government selected randomly, and I can describe it later on in more depth. But the majority will define whether the case is in favor of the merchant or the consumer, and this is how it works. And you can see the illustration of, how the majority defines it and how they stake some COTIs in order to, to back their vote, and by that get more from the fees of the dispute. As I said, the arbitration process is part of the infrastructure, but is built as an application layer atop the infrastructure. And this is very important for all services of COTI, meaning the infrastructure itself support whatever use case you want to use it. But if you don't need, for example, the arbitration for your own white label solution, you don't have to use it. It's an opt-in process. It goes also for the KYC process, which can be defined by the third party and not by COTI itself. So if you deploy a white label solution on our infrastructure, you can define all the application layer, either use ours or build your own with a simple API and SDK that we provide that you can use. And another important aspect that we added in testnet, and it's going to be available, of course, in the mainnet, is the fees model. I mean, you have to have an efficient way to balance incentive for the network, and in COTI, we collect network fees per transaction. So this needs to be distributed and collected in a fair way, in a fair manner, so all participants will get some cut of it, and not just, the big players. So we use a very transparent and equitable fee model, which guarantee that all fees are distributed and balanced between network participants, and no one is getting, ahead of the line, for example. In the next version, not just of the mainnet, the first version of the mainnet is going to be released very, very soon, in a few weeks from today. So in the first version, we are going to have most of what I've discussed in the testnet. Several aspects are currently in development and not yet available. Some of them are very important in order for enterprises and users and merchants to be able to define their own token. This is going to be available in the second and third phase of the mainnet, which is not far away. Some of them is the multi-DAG, which is very important and it's very unique. If you look at the other DAG-based platform, they don't really provide you with a way to run your own DAG. You have a first cluster and you can duplicate it to other use cases and have more than one cluster running in parallel. In COTI, it's going to be available. Once you deploy a token, it's going to be executed in parallel to the cluster 0, which is the COTI native coin. It's not a requirement. It's just if someone wants to have his own token, he can use the COTI token for every use. But if he wants to have a white label branded solution, then he can use his own cluster, define his own rules, have even a private subchain running on the chain with its own rules, its own definition. He can define who runs the nodes in this particular use case, if he wants it to be part of the global network or not. But it's important to say that the connection to the cluster 0, to the cluster native coin, is going to be in fees. All fees are going to be collected, no matter what the use case is going to be collected in COTI native coin. Another very unique aspect which is going to be available and we are currently working on is the smart contract. It's going to be very, very similar to Ethereum smart contract, but it's going to be on-chain as opposed to an off-chain smart contract which exists today. It's first of its kind, and it's first of its kind also on DAG. Again, this is something which allows you not just to deploy the token, but also to define the rules on the token. And these two aspects, together with the stablecoin framework, which we are going to support through our exchange, which allows us not just to mint and burn, but also to define very easily the collateralization in the network, all of them will allow you to deploy a token which is a payment token. Payment token needs to be stable. It needs to have a dispute resolution like we do. It needs to be supporting high throughput, which we have. You want it to be able to support specific rules of a sub-private network, which we support through a multi-DAG. And all of this together is going to provide a real competitor to any payment platform that you have today, with the addition that it supports cryptocurrency. Okay, I'm back and I will move forward to your question right now. Okay, so the first question is, with COTI mainnet promised to be released by the end of Q1, is COTI on track to fulfill this promise, or could the launch date be extended? As in all our previous releases, the mainnet is going to hit the mark with the milestone promised, as we did in all our previous releases. It is important to note that the preliminary release is a beta test release. It's going to be by the end of this month, but the real release is going to be 2 weeks after that. So the first phase is for beta testers to ensure that the network is running properly, and later on we will open it for everyone. Okay, the next question is, what are some things that COTI still needs to finish before its mainnet go live? So currently we are mainly working on testing our platform, and the testnet allowed us to have a lot of testing on the system. We already have 2 processor bill merchant working in the testnet in a beta mode. which already transact a lot of volume and ensure that the network is working properly. Other than that, we have bug fixes, of course, but we needs to finalize the registration flow with the ability to upgrade an account to node operator. As I said, this is something that is working in testnet, but we need to deploy it to mainnet as well. The node manager was added to the testnet a week ago, and we are currently testing it again with beta testers, and we'll open it to the public soon. We will also provide all the information needs in order for you to understand how to operate a node, what is required, what is the minimum requirement specification, and what's more important, what you're going to get out of it. I mean, what is your cut from the fees and how much can you get? We are also working on implementing snapshots and history nodes, which are not going to be part of the first phase of the mainnet. We call it the Genesis release, so it's not going to be part of it. We are going to deploy this type of features, let's say, in the infrastructure only 3 months after the first release, and they are not really required at the first phase because we are not going to have, significant volume which will require snapshots or history being stored other than the full node itself. But this is two aspects which are very important and we are working on. Another important one is, of course, the token generation process and also distribution process, integrating it to the COTI X. And the last thing is finalizing the ledger scan and the address blockchain. For us, it's going to be a viewer of the ledger, which will allow you to see the last blocks being transacted in the network. And also for each address, you're going to see exactly what type of transaction it had. Okay, another question is, just read down. David wrote, you mentioned that your network allows for protection against third-party seeing past transaction. Many BTC wallets now generate a new wallet for each transaction for the same process. Can you explain the difference? What the difference is, BTC is more for a user-to-user, a peer-to-peer transaction. So transacting in this way is not really helpful for a merchant-wise. I mean, it's going to be, for us, something automatic, embedded in the payment request itself, which will allow the merchant to actually hide his transactions. And this is something more related to a consumer merchant transaction and not really BTC wallet-to-wallet transaction. For wallet-to-wallet transaction, you don't need the ability to create a new wallet. For us, it's going to be that you're going to get a temporary address, a one-time address, you're going to use it. It's more straightforward than having a different new wallet generated for each transaction that you do. But again, BTC itself doesn't really support the use case that we are willing to support. So if we embed a pay with COTI or pay with other white label solution, it will require that you will generate a unique address for each transaction in an automatic manner and in a very, straightforward manner. Okay, another question is, if you implement a node, I guess you mean if you operate a node, you only get paid if the node gets used, right? This is correct. The COTI network uses a transparent and, as I said, equitable fee model. All fees are collected by the full nodes, and the COTI network receives a portion of the fees, a very small portion of the fees, collected by full node itself. So full nodes can define these fees for transactions and also takes the network fees, which is distributed to the financial server, which is a server which is responsible for distributing these fees to all the participants in the network, such as the double spend prevention node and the TrustCore server. So in case you're running these type of nodes, for example, not just the full node, DSP nodes and TrustCore node, you are going to get network fees. If you are a full node, you are going to get a portion of the transaction fees that you require. It's actually very important because the incentive for us is for merchants to run their own full node. I mean, we don't have mining in our network, so if you want incentivization in the network, the incentive for a merchant is very, very high, because a merchant can define, for example, for his user, the fees that he used to pay for PayPal is not going to take it from his user anymore, and he can cut the price by 5% or even more in other countries, and by that have a better offering to his users. So the incentive for running the full nodes for merchants are very, very high, and this is the, the adoption strategy that we are aiming for. Okay, I think it's a follow-up question. So do the customer user manually pick which node they want to use the service from, or will it be done by the COTI's algorithm? It's partly yes. I mean, they can choose. But what they can choose is user can choose manually pick the node they choose to connect to. I mean, when you open a wallet, you are able to see the fees and the nodes available for you to connect to, and you can choose which one to connect. I mean, if it's a merchant that you want to interact through his full node because of the fees that he's taking, that you can do that. But we are not going to enforce or do something automatically which will enforce anyone to connect to any node, and you cannot really define it. I mean, you cannot really enforce manually user to connect to you. They need to choose to do it. So it goes both ways. Okay, another question is, has COTI released the technical specification for the full node? We didn't yet release it. We released it, as I said, as a beta version to beta testers, which are currently testing it and running it in the testnet. And we already have several processors which are using it for real transaction and not just testing transaction, meaning COTI already have real volume on its testnet, and we are not even in mainnet yet. So our token, without being generated, already have a volume to it. But the real specification is not yet defined. I can say it in general. So in general, it's very, very minimal. And running an instance like that will require at max 60 gigabytes of memory, 4 CPUs core. We estimated the cost for running such a node as $120 monthly. The network bandwidth is very, very minimal as we see it. It's going to be 10 gigabits per second, and you can use Ubuntu, Linux, or whatever you choose. We tested it, and our beta testers are using AWS platform. You can use several types of EC2 instances, and it will work fine. And it won't, I mean, this cost, as you will see in a node calculator that we are going to release soon, this cost is going to be less than what you are going to get from the fees that you are going to collect in the network. So we are going to release also a node calculator, which will allow you to see how much a full node can profit from running, and he can compare it to the cost that it's going to take him to running this type of nodes. Okay, let me just see the question. Once again. You're asking a lot of questions about price and a lot of questions about the token itself. That's not really something that I can, address. Okay. You're asking, I will try to answer this. Again, this is a more business-wise question, but I will answer it from the technical aspect. So around what price would white label solution be? Is there any documentation available with this information? The answer is, first, it really depends on the white label solution that you require and how much work is required in order to be deployed. As a first level for the let's say, the first processor, we are helping a lot in order for them to be able to deploy their solution on our infrastructure. This is, of course, our incentive as well. So there is no fixed price. You're not required to do anything. I mean, the white labeling really depends on the type of solution you require. I mean, if you need to just take a button and deploy it and embed it in your website, it still can be a white label, but it doesn't require anything from your hand. And it won't require any significant cost to it. But if you do require to be connected with stablecoin, for example, mechanism, to have some enforcements on the KYC process, to have some enforcements on the arbitration process, you want some customizations on other stuff, these are all available, but do require cost, which is actually paid in COTI tokens, which are just held for a certain period of time, and after that, they are going to be released back to the merchant itself. Another question is, how do you update your trust score because of an outside event, for example? A user takes to court a merchant because he did not deliver him the product as promised. Okay, the trust score update mechanism basically works automatically and within the network based on transaction. I mean, if you have a dispute on a certain product, it will affect the trust score of the merchant if he loses this dispute. I mean, the first phase is not really going to court, is actually going to the system, opening a dispute in the system, and requiring the decentralized government deciding whether or not the merchant provided the product or not. And if he didn't, you will get your refund for the payment, and you don't really need to go to, let's say, the real world court. But if in case of a dispute which arrive to court and get a court decision, at first phase, we are going to support event being propagated to the network to a unique and, let's say, for at least at the first phase, a centralized entity, which will allow us to propagate this type of events to the trust score node, and by that also affect the trust score of this merchant and reverse the transaction if needed. At the second phase, these are going to be handled not by COTI itself, but again by a decentralized government, which is going to help us, review these type of cases and really remove the power of COTI as an entity and bring the power to the network itself, which currently is being used for the arbitration, but can be used for, let's say, reviewing KYC cases, can be used for defining which type of events we want to propagate to the network and which one we don't. All of these type of governments are going to be defined based on trust score, and each user can apply to it based on his trust score and how high is and how trustworthy he is in the network. Okay. Another question about the compensation plan for a node operator. So, as I said, the compensation plan is based on the fees a node operator choose to collect for each transaction confirmation. I mean, let's just compare it, for example, to PayPal. In PayPal, many merchants choose to embed PayPal as a payments processor. The reason they do it is PayPal provide them with buyer-seller protection. That's why they do it. But another reason they do it is because they can't be their own processor. With COTI, any merchant is actually becoming his own processor. He's actually becoming PayPal. And the unique thing about it, because it's a digital coin, and we do not, as a company, and the merchant is not holding the balances of users. It is not required to get any license, to operate this type of processing operation, which is required, for example, in PayPal case or in any other case that you want to process and hold values and balances of users. In the blockchain, you don't have to do it. The only one who have access to the balance is the user itself. You don't have control over it as a merchant. And by that, you actually take the power to the merchant himself. All the data inside is only stored, it's only available for the merchant itself about his user. He doesn't have to, to share it with other third parties like PayPal. They don't have the ability to sell it as a unique insight that they have about their users. And the more important stuff here is that you can define your own fees. Again, if you're a merchant, if I want to, for an e-commerce website, I want to just reduce my expenses by 5%, I can do it by taking the PayPal fees to myself, and by that, enlarging the turnovers that I get, or I can actually reduce it totally and use it as a top-up for my users. I mean, use this type of method. I have an incentive to use it. I actually also transact other transactions in the network, so I get more money to my let's say pool and to my address, and I can use it as rewarding my users, as giving discount to users, and stuff like that. But the compensation itself, if I return to the question, is based on the fees which each node defines. It is limited as a lower bound and a higher bound, but you can define within this bound whatever the fees that you want to collect based on what you believe is a fair fee. It's a free market, meaning that also the fees are collected in a decentralized way. We are not going to enforce anything. It's a free market. If someone is willing to pay you, let's say 10%, then you can take 10%. But since it's a free market, we believe that most of the users will have very minimal fees compared to the existing platforms. Okay. Another question is, can we run a full node in the testnet now? Not yet. Currently, it is only available for beta testers, and we will open it to the public mainly in mainnet, but we will expand it also in the testnet in the coming week. It will be available, but again, currently it's only for testing purposes. You won't get any fees collected in testnet. It's just seeing how much you will be able to collect and see how we transact and what is required, and that that the minimum requirement specification that we said that it is required, it really is. So you will be able to test it in mainnet. Again, we are going to increase the scale in levels. I mean, we are not going to allow endless full nodes running the first phase. We are going to add, very few every few weeks, just to make sure that the scale is holding and the system is holding and everything is working properly. Okay, so with COTI testnet, are there any bounty prices for anyone that finds report bugs? We don't have any official bounty plan, but anyone who reported a bug about COTI code or COTI product receive compensation in COTI tokens, and that's the way that we work currently. We are planning, once we issue the mainnet, to have a more, let's say, settled bounty plan for each type of bug. It's how critical it is in the system, and by that going to pay to user for, of course, the work. Okay, so another question is actually a very big question. I will try to answer it as shortly as I can. With the current hacks of exchanges in mind, how secure is COTI X, and what are the protections against hacks? We should actually, you should take COTI X, and I can explain what the security measure that we are taking in COTI X, but you should remember that third-party exchanges selling our token are not really the responsible of the infrastructure itself. It's like, it's like a bank and somebody just have a key to your safe and you choose to open it because you left the keys on the table, for example. So we cannot really protect cases that we are not responsible for. Infrastructure base is, of course, COTI X, in which we are going to have a lot of layers of protection, mainly For example, front-end protection from DDoS attack. We have firewalls and Amazon Shields installed on all our own instances. We're going to have always on monitoring, automatic migrations, backup, of course, L7 protection of the gateway and the web application, logging, alerts, authentication and authorization to a 2FA and a multi-sig, which are going to be deployed. We also have, of course, the KYC and AML, which are required as part of the registration, not just to COTI X, but also to the COTI network. It is not obligated, as I said, but at least for a certain level it is, and it will define the initial trust score. In COTI X, it is required in order for you to be able to transact. So customer identity and proof of identity, for example, are going to be required in order for you to be able to purchase a token. In the COTI X platform, the infrastructure level, we have security of application component hosted in private subnet and only secure communication. Everything is, of course, backup and secure through practices and best practices described through AW ASP. We have only logging and monitoring access through the offices. As for the wallet itself, is going to be hosted in a private subnet. Of course, not all the liquidity is going to be stored on a hot wallet. Most of it is going to be stored on cold wallet. I can go on and on what we are going to do, but we will release, let's say, a full specification of the COTI X infrastructure and how secure it is, so you can review it in more depth, because like that it's just too many specifications. Okay, another question. Let me just see. Another question is, are COTI doing reward points on the platform? I guess that you mean loyalty points and not really reward points, but maybe it's the same and I just don't know it. But yeah, I mean, you will be able to get top-ups and also loyalty set for your customer. You can do it as a subnet, as a private net. You can do it on the public network if you wish. All reward points can be public or private, meaning they can interact with other points, so that if you are let's say a small merchant and you provide reward points to your user, they can use it not just in your e-commerce website, but in other e-commerce websites which are running on the COTI platform. You can define how much and for what amount you bring, what type and level of rewards you are going to give your users. And yeah, this is something that is also embedded in the infrastructure as a service layer, and you can define it very easily once you deploy your solution on our platform. Okay. Another question is, does COTI have plans to build a system or partner with someone who has a system that you can pay your everyday bills on? We have partnered with several merchants which allows currently online payment. As I said, we already have a big volume of transaction running on the testnet coming from two implementations that we added to the platform. Of course, once we go live, we will have more requests and we will deploy more merchant. We don't have this specific use case. I mean, we don't have a merchant who requires and allows anyone to pay bills, but as we get more adapted, I'm sure that we will get even for this level of paying bills with digital currencies. Using COTI X, by the way, you don't have to have COTI. Your gateway out can be other pairs of tokens that we were going to define. So if you wish to pay with Bitcoin, it's also okay. And if you wish to pay with Ether, it's also okay. The entrance can be deposited with whatever cryptocurrency or fiat you have. and also the exit can be the same. So paying bills might be easier. If someone support, let's say, BTC and not COTI yet, we can support BTC as well. We also have a partner with Digital Sky, which offer point of sale for payments in shops. I mean, this is an offline merchant, which is going to be deployed also in Q2. And this is a very unique solution, which is going to be available in 250,000 point of sale distributed in Asia and in the US, which will allow you to transact from everyday transaction, as you call it, and real transaction in coffee shops or whatever you want to pay with it, as long as you have the point of sale terminal in your store. Okay. Another question is, what control does COTI, the company, have over COTI, the ecosystem? It really depends on the, I should separate this answer to currently and in the future. So currently we do have control over the network. We actually have a lot of control over the network at this phase because it's the preliminary phase. Once we go mainnet and we go live with the mainnet, the control over the network is going to be reduced by employing other possibilities to define and, let's say, allow users to onboard the system. So currently we hold the keys to the registration itself and defining the KYC and AML process. We are going to move in the future, in the near future, to a certain decentralized governments which are going to review this type of request, and they are the ones who are going to approve applications to the network. We also control the financial nodes, which is something just working as a gateway for distributing and collecting the network fees. All fees are auditable and transparent to the ledger and to the ledger explorer. So it's not that we can do something that it's not transparent to the network, but we are the one who run this node, and we are the one who is responsible for the availability of this type of node. And at this current point of time, no one else is going to execute this type of node. And at least at the beginning, we are going to also have the DSP and Trustchain node executed by COTI itself. The reason for that is that in order for you to be able to execute a DSP and Trustchain node, you need to have a certain trust. And to get, as a full node operator, to get to the threshold of trust that we require some time and some transactions being processed on your full nodes in order for you to be able to upgrade and be able to run it. So the first phase is going to be us. Later on is going to be anyone with high trust. We are going to replace all the components which are currently centralized with decentralized government, and will allow, at least for businesses and enterprise-wise, allows them to run their own, and of course not controlling also the enterprise level layers. Okay, another question is, what use cases does COTI coin have in the ecosystem? I think that the first question is, it's not just why do we need a coin, is what is actually the use case of a coin itself in our system. So if I try to briefly summarize it at the fundamental level, it's something, as I said before, it is important to understand why cryptocurrency at all is needed in a blockchain ecosystem. And the main reason relates to the fact that in order to be a processor of payments, any merchant or business will need to obtain a license, as I said, for storing value. For users which, SMB is something, for SMBs, it's something very complicated and very costly, and they don't want to have it. In addition, current solutions are very centralized. There is no audit. You require trust. While having cryptocurrencies, users have all their digital currencies on their hot or cold wallet. they are not the ones storing the value itself. I mean, if we try to separate it, if you take PayPal case, they are holding your value. If you take cryptocurrency case, and this is why you need a currency, a digital currency, then you need one which will be the only holder for the token is the user itself and not any processor. Now, why do we need COTI token? It's actually a different question, because you can say every use case can have its own token and take its own fees in this token. And why do we need a unified token? So this is just as an incentive and in a more reasonable way to incentivize the node operators in the system. We want a unified. We do want a unified token, one token which reflects how popular and how adaptive the network is. And you don't want the node operator or the one getting the token to try to assess the thousands of white label tokens that he gets for fees, and which one of them is really worth holding and which one of them it's not worth holding. You want something that it's unified, defines the network value itself and not the use cases of the network, and that's why we need it. Also, COTI native coin is also supported by KYC and AML laws, and it's registers, and it's something that you can really use as a payment and a utility token. And as I said, as opposed to PayPal virtual coin, this type of way of holding token is more secure, and again, it reflects only the network value itself and not something else. Okay, just drill down in the questions. Okay, will the KYC approval process be decentralized? So at the first phase of the mainnet, no, it's not going to be decentralized. At the first phase, COTI is the responsible entity for that. We are using an automatic way of at least, identifying and approving applications, so it's not going to take a lot of time for a user to get approved on the system. But we are the one running the server, and we are the one who are going to do the approval process. But in the near future, as I said, currently the reviewers are COTI, and in the future, this centralized government is going to be the one reviewing, like we have in arbitration. People from the network are going to get fees for doing that. We are going to pay them from the network fees to do this type of operation. And you are going to have a decentralized of high trusted users, approving users to the system, reviewing documents about the users if it's not approved automatically, and just allowing users to onboard to the system. Another question is, are all COTI software proprietary? Can someone hard soft fork it? Yeah, all COTI software is our own developed proprietary. It is open source, but it doesn't mean that you can fork it, you can use it. On the public network, you can use it again. With whatever solution that you require, we take the fees, so it's okay. For forking and running, let's say, a parallel network based on our network, this is something associated with the GNU license, meaning that you will require to get a commercial use for this type of fork, and you cannot really do it without COTI approval. Okay. Let me see another question. Already answered. Okay, another question is, COTI Trustchain infrastructure is a DAG-based with low transaction cost and high TPS. This looks like promising concept. Other crypto projects also build DAG-based ledger, for example, IOTA Tangle. What makes COTI Trustchain so special compared to IOTA Tangle? Okay, so there are, as you said, there are more than one, actually many DAG-based solution. All of them are, each one of them is directing a different use case. And, just to say it straightforward, IOTA is a great project, and the two projects and infrastructure are not really approaching the same use cases, and of course, very different in every aspect related to the protocol, the consensus. IOTA is aimed more to the IoT and Internet of Things, and as a general purpose infrastructure, like most infrastructure actually. While COTI is focused mainly, as I said, on fintech and payment industry, and we try to make it as easy as possible to deploy a fintech solution, a payment solution, a consumer merchant solution, or any type of solution focused on that. We don't provide only the infrastructure, we provide the infrastructure, the services, and the application layer. All of them are customizable. All of them are, as I said, provide a full ecosystem. On each one of them, you can define a token, you can deploy it, you can make it accessible. This is something that other infrastructure are not really handling. They're just giving you the infrastructure layer, and you need to do all the rest. Also, COTI offers several capabilities which does not exist in IOTA, like multi-DAG. Multi-DAG is something that we invented and which allows us to run more than one DAG as opposed to IOTA, which only had one DAG. We are going to be the first one who are going to offer on-chain smart contract, as opposed, for example, for Ethereum off-chain smart contracts. On DAG, there is no on-chain solution right now, so we're going to be the first one. And everything is going to be supported by defining token, defining if it's going to be stable or not, which are very, very important for any payment processing platform. I mean, if you look at Facebook or Telegram, they are going to issue, or JP Morgan, they are going to issue stablecoin. They are not going to just issue a token, which is very volatile. So our infrastructure is already supporting this use case, which is more directed to the fintech and the payment industry. And that's our focus. We took this focus, which is different from other platforms, and added all the required application layer which needs in order to us to be able to operate it. Okay, another question. Okay, I think it's the follow-up question, and so it's when will the KYC approval process be decentralized? It's going to be decentralized. Mainnet is going to be deployed in a few weeks, and let's say in several months from the mainnet pre-release, it's going to be moved to a decentralized government handling this type of reviewing, and not COTI itself. Okay. One second, just reviewing the question. Please explain your reasons for running zero-spend server, your plans about the future network design, and how you will achieve a fully decentralized status. The purpose of zero-spend server is for releasing. I think I said it in the beginning, but I will repeat it. It's releasing idled transaction in the network. And that's its only purpose. I mean, if you took other infrastructure and other comparable, let's say, infrastructure based on DAG, it's not a coordinator. It's not something in the middle which confirm transaction. It's just something which release idle transaction. By that, I mean that COTI will be more and more adopted. Once it be more and more adopted, the zero-spend server is not required. It's not going to be a necessity of the zero-spend server to reduce. So it's going to be reduced from the ecosystem once we get adopted and once we get more transactions being processed on the network. So its only purpose is for the first phases of the network. Once we don't have enough transaction and transaction can idle for a long time, in these cases, we are going to release them by producing a zero-value transaction attached to the DAG validating the transaction and releasing it. So we won't have idle transaction like you have in many other platforms for a long time. Okay, another question, again, a very big question, is how does the COTI DAG different from other DAGs? I think I touched most of the aspects which makes us different, but I can return on the highlights of them. We have our own proof of trust. So each transaction in the COTI cluster receives a trust score, which is not comparable to other implementation, where you have the same weight for each attachment applied to the DAG. We don't have the same weight. We have different weight based on trust score, based on normalization of trust score and other aspects in the network. The transaction trust score is used to define the unvalidated transaction, which will be validating, meaning you get to validate the transaction in the same level of yours, and not all type of transaction are associated with each one. We have the ability to monitor the network behavior, not just by trust score, but also, as I said, we have many other aspects which can define how a network and a node operator operates in the network, and by that reducing and increasing his trust score and allowing us to penalize let's say untrustworthy node operators or users. Another difference is actually the introduction of the double spend prevention nodes, and the way that the work is different from other platforms. We don't require a full consensus from all the network. We do require it, but not all network components needs to be connected to each other. We define clusters. Each clusters communicate with the other clusters, so the bandwidth is reduced significantly, and you are not putting all your eggs in one unified network, but you have clusters. So affecting the network is more complicated than in other platforms, because your way of entering and getting out of a cluster is not defined by you. It's actually randomized. You are not going to be, it's not going to be based on geographical aspects or other aspects which allow you to manipulate the system. And as I said, the main differences are the multi-DAG concept, the smart contract, the stability framework, and all the full ecosystem which makes and embedded into the infrastructure itself and allows us to provide a very off-the-shelf solution to any payment processing platform that you need. Okay. Let me see. Okay, another question is, how about compared with Hashgraph? So Hashgraph is, again, going for a different use case. It's not really the payment industry, and they don't have, I repeat it a lot here, but it's very, very important to repeat it. They don't have all the services and application layer that we offer. It's not just the infrastructure that is different. And in Hashgraph, the control of the network is fully held by Hashgraph consoles and not really by the user itself. You can't really become a validator. Validators are not just high trusted users in the network. There are consoles of enterprises chosen to execute and control the network itself. But other than that, which is, you can say pros and cons of every infrastructure, but other than that, what's important to say is, again, for a payment system, you need other infrastructure-based support, which is not available on Hashgraph, like stablecoin framework, like the dispute resolution. Trust score for us is very important. The one-click payment request, which is very, very important. The consensus work differently. We allow anyone to execute full nodes, and we incentivize anyone to do it. The arbitrator and the decentralized government are users from the network and not, enterprises and businesses. So these are the main differences for that. Okay, another question is why introduce a stable coin into the platform? What purpose does it serve? As I said before, currently for being a payment, if I pay you something, if I'm a consumer and I want to pay a merchant, both sides don't want to be affected by the volatility of the coin itself. So to be considered as a payment on mass scale, it is clear that merchants won't accept a coin that can decrease in values, and consumer won't pay with a coin that may be appreciating values. So it also keeps the enterprises and big merchants out, as they don't want to add a risk to their business. So for us, and for any business who wants to transact as it transacts with cash, which is volatile, but is not as volatile as cryptocurrency currently is, it was clear to us that a price-stable framework and coin is needed. That's basically it. Another question is, a big point of difference with COTI and other payment projects is the buyer-seller protection. How does the arbitration system works, and how will users be rewarded for being a mediator? Will they need to stake COTI to do so? Okay, I will do it briefly because, again, you can read about it in our specification. The process is more complex than what I'm going to describe right now, but the initial process of arbitration in COTI solution is quite similar, as I said, to current available online dispute management platform, in which the consumer and the merchants have a time frame for trying to resolve the disputes between themselves without moving forward to the arbitration voting totally. In this process, they will include uploading any supporting document or information which is interacted and presented. And first the merchant, and later on in the process, also the arbitrators will be, exposed to this type of evidence which were brought to the process. Arbitrators will dispute in order to collect arbitration fees, obviously. They are incentivized to rule honestly because after a dispute is over, only arbitrators whose vote is in concurrent with the majority will lose the significant part of the arbitration fees that will be given to the current arbitrators, meaning that you will get more of the fees if you were with the majority of the arbitrators, and if not, you're going to get less. You're still going to get something. What you're going to get is based on the staking that you provide for your vote. We have a lot of aspects and tools here which we developed in order to be able to monitor this type of process, make sure that it's not going to be a random voting. You're going to need to provide a full description of why you decided and what you decided. We have automatic tools which can analyze this type of information. If you are not going to dispute, if you're just going to choose something randomly, you're going to be penalized, and you're going to risk yourself of being kicked out as the arbitrator. As part of the arbitration system, we collect from, just for the transaction of consumer and merchant, we collect running reserve, which is based on the trust score of the merchants, which will cover this operation, meaning as any other dispute resolution process take fees for managing the process. So for this type of operation, we are going to take fees, which are going to then be distributed to the arbitrator itself. Arbitrators are chosen randomly. They cannot interact with each other. They don't know each other. We chose, of course, several for each case, and depends on the case. It can be a lot of jurors, a lot of arbitrators, and not just a few, to make it more a trustworthy process. Okay, I will take one last question, and then we will end the webinar. So what fees are expected on the platform? The COTI network uses, for us, the fees are separated to two types of fees. As I said, there is the full node fees, which are defined by the full node operator. It it defines within a range of fees being collected. On that, there is also a network fee, which is also collected by the full node, but propagated to the financial server and then distributed to the network participant. The network fee is very, very minimal. We're talking about 0.2% from the transaction cost. And in several cases, as I said, full node operators might require less. So the total fees are going to be significantly less than any other paper-like platform, which can take 5 to 8% even in some use cases. Okay, so thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining our second webinar following our testnet. You can review the code, which is available on GitHub. You can actually test the testnet, use the crypto shop, open a wallet. Later on this week and in the upcoming week, we will release the node operator's specification and a way to register as a testnet node operator, and also see the node calculator and profit calculator. And in a few weeks, we are going to release the mainnet, which is going to support the first phase of COTI, and the Genesis mainnet is going to include COTI token for the first time. So thank you very much.